Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for over 12 years, and in that time he thought he had seen every possible family dynamic. Happy families celebrating together, competitive families trading playful jabs, nervous families supporting each other through their anxiety. But nothing in his extensive experience could have prepared him for what was about to unfold on that warm September afternoon in 2024. The Henderson family from Georgia stood on stage, their smiles bright under the studio lights, but beneath the surface tension simmered that would soon erupt into one of the most shocking and ultimately redemptive moments in the show's history. Before we dive into this powerful story about marriage, forgiveness, and second chances, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share these important family stories with people who need to hear them. The Henderson family consisted of 5 members standing at their podium. There was Patricia Henderson, age 58, a schoolteacher with kind eyes and a gentle smile that seemed to hide years of quiet pain. Standing beside her was her husband Michael, also 58, a construction foreman whose broad shoulders and weathered hands spoke of decades of hard physical labor. Their 3 adult children completed the team, Jennifer at 32, Marcus at 30, and the youngest daughter Sarah at 27. To anyone watching at home, they appeared to be a typical American family ready to compete for prize money and enjoy their moment on national television. But appearances can be deeply deceiving. The game had started normally enough. Steve Harvey delivered his characteristic humor, making jokes about the survey answers and the family's responses. The Hendersons were competing against the Morrison family from Tennessee, and the competition was close. Both families were playing well, answering questions correctly and keeping the audience engaged. Patricia had been particularly impressive, answering several questions with confidence and precision that suggested a sharp mind and quick wit. But Steve had noticed something unusual about the family dynamic from the very beginning. Throughout the game, whenever Patricia gave a correct answer, her husband Michael would offer only the briefest of congratulations before turning away. When their children celebrated her successes, Michael would stand with his arms crossed, his expression neutral bordering on disapproving. Steve, who had developed an instinct for reading family dynamics after years of hosting, sensed that something was off. During commercial breaks, he had tried to engage Michael in conversation, but the man had remained distant and curt in his responses. Patricia, meanwhile, seemed to shrink slightly whenever her husband was addressed, as if making herself smaller could somehow keep the peace. The Hendersons eventually won the main game, and it was time for fast money. Patricia and her eldest daughter Jennifer would play for the $20,000 prize. Jennifer went first and scored a solid 168 points, meaning Patricia needed just 32 points to secure the win. It should have been an easy task, a moment of celebration and excitement. But as Patricia took her position at the podium, Steve noticed her hands were trembling and her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. Something was very wrong. Steve approached Patricia with his usual warmth and encouragement, ready to begin the fast money questions. But before he could start, Patricia held up her hand and asked if she could say something. The vulnerability in her voice made Steve immediately signal to the producers to hold the questions. He stepped closer to Patricia, his expression shifting from game show host to concerned human being, and he told her she could take all the time she needed. What happened next would forever change how everyone in that studio understood the power of marriage vows and the weight of words spoken in anger. Patricia took a deep breath and looked directly at the cameras. Her voice was quiet but steady as she began to speak. She said that she needed to share something before they continued with the game, something that had been weighing on her heart for 27 years. The studio fell completely silent. Even the production crew stopped their usual bustling to listen. Patricia explained that she and Michael had been married for 35 years total, and that for the first 8 years their marriage had been good. They had loved each other, supported each other, and built a life together. They had welcomed 3 beautiful children and worked hard to provide for their family. Then Patricia revealed the moment that had defined the last 27 years of her life. She described an argument they had gotten into when their youngest daughter Sarah was just a baby. It had been a particularly stressful time in their lives. Michael had been laid off from his job, money was extremely tight, and they were both exhausted from caring for 3 young children. During one heated argument about finances and household responsibilities, Michael had said something in the heat of anger that he could never take back. He had told Patricia that marrying her was the biggest mistake of his life. He said he regretted ever saying "I do," that she had trapped him with children, and that he would have been better off alone. The audience gasped audibly. Steve Harvey's face registered complete shock, but Patricia was not finished with her story. She needed everyone to understand the full weight of what those words had done to her and to their marriage. She explained that Michael had apologized the very next day. He had said he was sorry that he had spoken in anger, that he did not mean it. She had accepted his apology because that was what you did in a marriage. You forgave, you moved forward, you tried to rebuild. But something fundamental had broken that day, something that all the apologies in the world could not quite repair. Patricia described how for the next 27 years she had carried those words with her every single day. When she cooked dinner for the family, she wondered if he resented sitting at the table with her. When she celebrated their anniversaries, she questioned whether he was only going through the motions out of obligation. When they attended their children's graduations and weddings, she caught herself looking at his face and trying to determine if he wished he was there with someone else, anyone else, instead of with the woman he had called his biggest mistake. She had spent nearly 3 decades living with a man while simultaneously feeling like an unwanted burden in her own marriage. The tears were flowing freely down Patricia's face now, but she pressed on with her story. She told the audience and the cameras that she had never told anyone about what Michael had said that day. Not her mother, not her best friend, not even her own children. She had carried the pain alone because she was ashamed. She believed that if she admitted her husband regretted marrying her, people would think less of her. They would wonder what was wrong with her that her own husband wished he had never married her. So she had smiled through family gatherings, laughed at appropriate times, and pretended that everything was fine. But inside, a part of her had died that day 27 years ago, and she had been living as a ghost in her own life ever since. Patricia then turned to look directly at her husband Michael, who was standing frozen at the family podium with an expression of absolute horror on his face. She told him that she had forgiven him long ago for what he said. She believed he had spoken in anger and stress, and she understood that people sometimes say terrible things they do not mean when they are overwhelmed. But forgiveness and healing were not the same thing. She had forgiven him, but she had never healed from those words. And now, standing on this stage in front of millions of people, she realized that she could not carry this pain for one more day. She needed to speak her truth, to stop pretending, to finally be honest about the wound that had never properly closed. The studio was completely silent except for the sound of Patricia's voice and the quiet sobs coming from various members of the audience. Steve Harvey stood with tears streaming down his face, his hand over his heart as he listened to this woman's confession. The Henderson children were crying openly, their faces showing shock and heartbreak as they learned for the first time about the pain their mother had been carrying for their entire lives. But the person who looked most devastated was Michael himself. Michael Henderson had been standing at the podium throughout his wife's confession, and as she spoke, each word seemed to physically impact him like a blow. His face had gone from neutral to shocked to completely shattered. By the time Patricia finished speaking, Michael was openly weeping, his broad shoulders shaking with the force of his sobs. He tried to speak several times but could not seem to form words through his tears. Finally, he managed to say his wife's name, and the anguish in his voice was unmistakable. Steve Harvey, who had remained silent throughout Patricia's revelation, now stepped forward to address both Patricia and Michael. But before he could speak, Michael held up his hand and asked if he could respond to what his wife had just shared. Steve immediately agreed, understanding that this moment had transcended the boundaries of a typical game show and had become something much more profound. The producers made no move to cut to commercial or redirect the show's flow. Everyone in that studio understood they were witnessing something rare and important, and they were willing to let it unfold naturally. Michael walked across the stage to stand directly in front of his wife. The cameras captured every moment as this man, who had been so distant and cold throughout the game, now looked at his wife with an expression of absolute devastation and love. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion and completely sincere in a way that could not be manufactured or performed. He told Patricia that he had no idea, truly no idea, that she had been carrying that pain for 27 years. He had apologized the next day after their argument, and when she had accepted his apology, he had foolishly believed that they had moved past it. He had convinced himself that those words spoken in anger had been forgiven and forgotten. Michael continued, explaining that he had known their marriage had changed after that fight, but he had attributed it to the normal evolution of a long-term relationship. He thought the distance between them was just what happened when you had been married for decades, when the passion of youth gave way to the comfortable routine of middle age. He had noticed that Patricia seemed quieter, less open, more guarded, but he had told himself that was just who she had become as she aged. It had never occurred to him that she was withdrawing because of the wound he had inflicted with his careless, cruel words. Then Michael said something that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. He told Patricia that those words he had spoken 27 years ago were not just wrong, they were the opposite of his truth. Yes, he had said them in a moment of anger and stress, but even in that moment they had been a lie born of frustration rather than genuine feeling. The truth, the real truth that he should have been saying every single day for the past 27 years was that marrying her was the best decision he had ever made. She was not his biggest mistake. She was his greatest blessing. Every good thing in his life, every moment of joy, every accomplishment, every beautiful memory could be traced back to the day she had agreed to be his wife. Michael's voice broke as he continued speaking. He told Patricia that she had given him 3 incredible children who had grown into amazing adults. She had supported him through job losses and health scares and moments of doubt. She had been patient with his flaws, kind despite his shortcomings, and loyal even when he had not deserved her loyalty. She had made their house a home. She had loved his family like her own. She had been everything a partner should be, and he had repaid her by speaking words that had poisoned their marriage for nearly 3 decades. The emotion in the studio was overwhelming. Steve Harvey was crying openly, making no attempt to hide his tears. The Henderson children had moved closer to their parents, forming a circle around them as their father spoke from his heart. The audience members were weeping, and several of the production crew had tears streaming down their faces. This was no longer a game show. This had become a moment of raw human truth, of accountability, of a man finally understanding the full weight of damage he had caused and desperately trying to make it right. Michael then did something that surprised everyone. He got down on one knee in front of his wife, there on the Family Feud stage in front of millions of viewers. He took both of her hands in his and looked up at her with tears in his eyes. He told her that he could not undo the past 27 years. He could not take back those horrible words or erase the pain they had caused. But he could make her a promise right here, right now, in front of all these witnesses. He promised that if she was willing to give him another chance, if she was willing to try to truly heal their marriage instead of just surviving it, he would spend every remaining day of his life proving to her that she was cherished, valued, and absolutely essential to his happiness. Michael said he understood if she could not forgive him again, if the damage was too deep to repair. He would not blame her if she decided that 27 years of carrying that pain was enough, and she deserved to move forward without him. But he was asking, begging really, for the opportunity to show her what he should have been showing her all along. He wanted her to feel loved, not just tolerated. He wanted her to feel celebrated, not endured. He wanted to rebuild their marriage on a foundation of truth and daily affirmation rather than on the shaky ground of old wounds and unspoken pain. Patricia looked down at her husband kneeling before her, and for a long moment she said nothing. The silence in the studio was profound. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see how this woman who had suffered in silence for so long would respond to this public declaration and plea for forgiveness. When Patricia finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but every word was clear and meaningful. She told Michael that she had spent 27 years building walls around her heart to protect herself from being hurt by his words again. Those walls had kept out the pain, but they had also kept out the love, the connection, the intimacy that a marriage should have. She had been living in a prison of her own making, one built from fear and hurt and the desire to never feel that vulnerable again. But standing here on this stage, having finally spoken her truth, she realized that those walls had not protected her. They had only isolated her. She had been so busy protecting herself from potential future hurt that she had denied herself any chance at genuine happiness. Patricia said that she believed Michael's words were sincere. She could see the genuine remorse and love in his eyes, could hear the truth in his trembling voice. She believed that he had not understood the depth of the wound he had caused, and that he was genuinely sorry not just for the words themselves, but for the years of pain that had followed. And because she believed his sincerity, and because she still loved the man she had married 35 years ago, she was willing to try. She was willing to take down the walls she had built. She was willing to be vulnerable again. She was willing to give their marriage a real chance to heal and become what it should have been all along. The studio erupted in applause and cheers as Patricia reached down to help Michael to his feet. He stood and pulled her into an embrace that was clearly filled with decades of emotion, love, regret, gratitude, and hope, all compressed into a single moment. Their children surrounded them, wrapping their arms around both parents in a family hug that seemed to symbolize the healing that was beginning. Steve Harvey stood off to the side, openly weeping and shaking his head in amazement at what had just transpired on his stage. When the family finally separated from their embrace, Steve Harvey stepped forward to address them and the audience. His voice was thick with emotion as he spoke. He told Michael and Patricia that in over a decade of hosting Family Feud, he had never witnessed anything quite like what had just happened. He said that what they had just done, the honesty and vulnerability they had shown, was one of the bravest things he had ever seen. Patricia had found the courage to speak a truth she had been hiding for 27 years, and Michael had found the courage to truly hear it, accept responsibility for it, and commit to making it right. Steve then shared something personal. He told the audience that he had been married multiple times in his life, and he understood from personal experience how easy it was to say hurtful things in moments of anger or stress. He also understood how those words, once spoken, could never be truly taken back. They might be forgiven, but they were never forgotten. They lived in the relationship like ghosts, haunting quiet moments and creating distance where there should be closeness. He said that Michael's words from 27 years ago had been those kind of ghost words, and Patricia's confession today had finally brought them into the light where they could be properly addressed. But Steve also spoke about hope and redemption. He told Michael and Patricia that what they had just done was incredibly difficult, but also incredibly powerful. They had taken a wound that had been festering for 27 years and finally exposed it to the air so it could truly begin to heal. That took courage from both of them, Patricia's courage in speaking her truth, and Michael's courage in hearing it without defensiveness and responding with genuine remorse and commitment. Steve said that if they could maintain this level of honesty and vulnerability with each other moving forward, their marriage could become stronger than it had ever been. Then Steve Harvey did something unexpected. He announced that while the $20,000 prize for winning fast money was important, this family needed something more than money right now. He said that his foundation would be paying for Michael and Patricia to attend an intensive marriage counseling retreat specifically designed for couples who were trying to rebuild after major breaches of trust. The retreat would give them tools and support to continue the healing process they had started on this stage. The audience erupted in applause at this generous gesture, but Steve was not finished. Steve also announced that he wanted to do something to honor Patricia specifically. He spoke directly to her, telling her that she had spent 27 years making herself smaller, quieter, less visible in an attempt to avoid further pain. But her voice mattered. Her feelings mattered. She mattered. And to help her reclaim her sense of self-worth, his foundation would be providing funding for her to pursue whatever personal goal or dream she had put aside over the years. Whether it was furthering her education, starting a business, traveling to places she had always wanted to see, or anything else that would help her rediscover who Patricia was beyond her role as Michael's wife and her children's mother. Patricia was overwhelmed by Steve's generosity and kindness. She thanked him through her tears, and then she did something beautiful. She asked if they could still finish the fast money round. She wanted to complete what they had started, not for the prize money, but because she wanted to prove to herself that she could stand at that podium and answer those questions with confidence and strength. She wanted her first act in this new chapter of her life to be one of completion and competence rather than just emotional catharsis. Steve immediately agreed, and they prepared to finish the fast money questions. But before they started, Patricia turned to Michael and their children and told them something important. She said that the healing she was beginning today was not just about their marriage. It was about her reclaiming herself. For too long, she had defined her worth by how others saw her, particularly how she thought Michael saw her. Moving forward, she needed to remember her own value regardless of anyone else's opinion or words. She asked her children to hold her accountable to that, to remind her of her worth when she forgot it, and to support her as she learned to be vulnerable without being small. The fast money questions proceeded, and Patricia answered each one with a steady voice and clear mind. When the final answer was revealed, she had scored well over the 32 points needed to win. The family had won the $20,000, but everyone in that studio understood that the real victory had nothing to do with money. The real victory was in the truth that had been spoken, the accountability that had been accepted, and the commitment to healing that had been made. When the episode aired 3 weeks later, the response was unlike anything Family Feud had ever experienced. The clip of Patricia's confession and Michael's response went viral within hours, accumulating tens of millions of views across all social media platforms. News outlets picked up the story, and suddenly the nation was engaged in conversations about marriage, communication, forgiveness, and the long-term impact of words spoken in anger. Relationship counselors referenced the episode in their practices. Churches showed clips during sermons about forgiveness and redemption. Marriage workshops used it as a teaching tool about the importance of addressing wounds rather than just covering them with apologies. The response was not universally positive. Some people criticized Patricia for staying in a marriage where she felt unwanted for so many years. They argued she should have left and found someone who truly appreciated her. Others criticized Michael for being so oblivious to his wife's pain for nearly 3 decades. They questioned how a man could live with a woman for that long and not notice she was suffering. These criticisms sparked important conversations about what people owe themselves in relationships and what responsibility we have to notice when our partners are hurting. But the overwhelming majority of responses were deeply positive and often personal. Thousands of people, mostly women but many men as well, reached out through social media to share their own stories of carrying hidden wounds in their marriages. They wrote about hurtful words that had never been properly addressed, about feeling like burdens or mistakes in their own relationships, about the loneliness of smiling through pain while dying inside. Patricia's courage in speaking her truth had given them permission to acknowledge their own truths, and many reported finally having honest conversations with their spouses after years or even decades of silence. Michael and Patricia Henderson's story had touched a nerve because it was so relatable. Almost everyone who had been in a long-term relationship could identify with either speaking in anger and later regretting it, or being wounded by someone's words and struggling to move past that wound. The Hendersons had simply experienced a more dramatic version of something that was nearly universal in human relationships. The fact that they had addressed it publicly and committed to healing it publicly made their story both inspiring and instructive. 6 months after the episode aired, Family Feud did a follow-up segment with the Henderson family. The transformation was remarkable and immediately apparent. Michael and Patricia appeared on screen together, and the difference in their body language was striking. They sat close together, comfortable with casual touches and genuine smiles. Patricia, in particular, looked different. She held herself with more confidence, spoke with more authority, and radiated a kind of peaceful contentment that had been completely absent during their first appearance. Patricia shared that the marriage counseling retreat had been transformative for both of them. They had spent an intensive week working with counselors who specialized in rebuilding trust and intimacy after betrayal or long-standing wounds. The counselors had helped them understand the patterns they had fallen into over the past 27 years, the ways they had both contributed to maintaining distance in their relationship, and the tools they needed to build something healthier and more connected moving forward. One of the most important things they had learned was the practice of daily affirmation. The counselors had explained that Michael's hurtful words 27 years ago had created a deficit in Patricia's emotional bank account, and that deficit could not be erased by a single apology or even a dramatic public declaration. It required consistent deposits over time. So Michael had committed to telling Patricia every single day at least one specific thing he loved or appreciated about her. Not generic compliments, but specific observations about who she was and what she brought to his life. Patricia shared that in the beginning, those daily affirmations had felt awkward and almost painful to receive. She had been so conditioned to expect disappointment or criticism that genuine appreciation felt foreign and uncomfortable. But Michael had persisted, and slowly, day by day, those consistent affirmations had begun to heal the old wound. She described it as being like physical therapy for an injury. At first, every movement hurt, but with consistent gentle exercise, the injured area grew stronger and the pain diminished. 6 months of daily affirmations had not erased 27 years of pain, but they had created genuine hope that complete healing was possible. Michael spoke about his own journey over the past 6 months. He shared that the marriage counseling had forced him to confront some uncomfortable truths about himself. He had spent years being emotionally unavailable and distant, telling himself it was just his personality or the natural progression of a long marriage. But the counselors had helped him understand that his distance had been a form of emotional laziness. He had taken Patricia for granted, assuming she would always be there regardless of how much effort he put into their relationship. The thought that he might actually lose her had been the wake-up call he apparently needed. Their children also participated in the follow-up segment, sharing how their parents' public confession and commitment to healing had impacted them. Jennifer, the eldest daughter, spoke about how she had always sensed tension in her parents' marriage, but had never understood the source. Learning the truth had been painful but also clarifying. It had explained so many small moments from her childhood that had seemed odd or uncomfortable at the time. She said that watching her parents work to rebuild their relationship had taught her important lessons about her own marriage and the importance of addressing problems directly rather than letting them fester. Marcus, the middle child, shared something particularly moving. He said that as a man, watching his father take full responsibility for the pain he had caused and then commit to making it right had been one of the most powerful lessons of his life. Too often, he said, men were taught to defend themselves, minimize their mistakes, or shift blame rather than truly accepting accountability. His father's example had shown him what real masculine strength looked like, and it was not about being tough or stoic. It was about being honest enough to admit when you were wrong and humble enough to ask for another chance. Sarah, the youngest daughter and the baby who had been present during her parents' original fight, spoke about forgiveness. She said that watching her mother choose to forgive and give their marriage another chance, even after carrying pain for so long, had challenged her own understanding of what forgiveness meant. It was not about pretending you were not hurt or letting someone off the hook without consequences. Real forgiveness was choosing to open yourself to potential hurt again because you believed in the possibility of something better. That kind of forgiveness required both courage and wisdom. The follow-up segment also revealed what Patricia had chosen to do with the personal development funding that Steve Harvey's foundation had provided. She had decided to return to school to complete her master's degree in education, something she had started 30 years ago but had abandoned when her children were born. She was now halfway through the program and was excelling in her courses. More importantly, she said, the experience of being a student again had reminded her that she was capable of growth and learning and achievement independent of her role as wife and mother. Patricia also shared that she had started a support group for women in her community who were struggling in their marriages. The group met twice a month and provided a safe space for women to share their experiences, their wounds, and their hopes without judgment. She said that speaking her truth on Family Feud had given her a purpose beyond her own healing. If her story could help even one other woman find the courage to address the pain in her marriage rather than suffering in silence, then the discomfort of being so vulnerable on national television had been worth it. Michael had made changes in his own life as well. He had started attending a men's group at their church focused on emotional intelligence and healthy masculinity. He shared that being in a room with other men who were working on being better husbands and fathers had been incredibly valuable. It had shown him that his struggles were not unique, and that strength came not from having all the answers but from being willing to ask the questions and do the work. Steve Harvey, watching the follow-up segment with his studio audience, was visibly moved by the Henderson family's progress. He spoke about how their story had impacted him personally and professionally. He said that hosting Family Feud had always been about more than just entertainment for him. It was about celebrating families, highlighting the best in people, and occasionally providing a platform for real human moments that could inspire and teach. The Hendersons had given him and the show one of those rare moments, and he was honored to have been part of their journey. The impact of the Henderson family's story extended far beyond the immediate responses to the viral video. Marriage counselors reported an increase in couples seeking help after seeing the episode, with many citing Patricia and Michael's example as inspiration to address issues they had been avoiding. Several organizations that provided relationship counseling and support services reported increased donations, with donors specifically mentioning that the Family Feud episode had reminded them of the importance of these services. Universities and relationship researchers began studying what they called the Henderson effect, the phenomenon of people being more willing to address long-standing relationship wounds after witnessing someone else model that vulnerability and see positive results. Preliminary research suggested that seeing public examples of successful relationship repair could reduce the stigma around marriage counseling and make people more willing to seek help rather than suffering in silence or simply ending relationships. Religious communities also engaged deeply with the Henderson story. Many sermons were preached about forgiveness, the power of words, and the importance of tending to relationships rather than taking them for granted. Some churches started marriage mentorship programs where older couples who had successfully navigated challenges could support younger couples who were struggling. The Henderson story provided a framework for talking about these issues in honest, vulnerable ways, rather than presenting an unrealistic picture of perfect marriages. 1 year after their original appearance on Family Feud, The Hendersons were invited back for a special anniversary episode. They appeared alongside several other families whose stories had touched the nation's heart, but it was clear that Michael and Patricia's journey held a special place in everyone's memory. The couple walked onto the stage hand in hand, and the difference from their first appearance was extraordinary. They looked younger, lighter, more connected. The tension and distance that had been so apparent a year earlier had been replaced by genuine warmth and partnership. During the anniversary episode, Steve Harvey asked them to reflect on the past year and what they had learned. Patricia spoke first, and her words were powerful and clear. She said that the most important lesson she had learned was that suffering in silence never leads to healing. For 27 years, she had believed that keeping the peace by hiding her pain was the right thing to do. She had thought she was being strong, being a good wife, protecting her family from conflict. But all she had really been doing was allowing a wound to fester and infect her entire life. True strength, she had learned, was in speaking the truth even when it was uncomfortable, and trusting that people who truly loved you would respond with care rather than dismissal. Michael's response was equally profound. He said that his biggest lesson had been about the power and responsibility of words. Men in his generation had often been taught that words were less important than actions, that you showed love through providing and protecting rather than through verbal affirmation. But he had learned the hard way that words mattered deeply. They had the power to wound in ways that could last for decades, but they also had the power to heal when used consistently and sincerely. He now understood that he had a daily responsibility to speak life and affirmation into his marriage, not because Patricia was weak or needy, but because she deserved to know how valued she was. The couple also shared some practical advice for other couples who might be struggling with similar issues. Patricia emphasized the importance of counseling, saying that trying to heal a wounded marriage without professional help was like trying to treat a serious medical condition without seeing a doctor. The counselors had given them tools and frameworks that they could not have developed on their own. Michael added that the daily practice of specific affirmations had been crucial. Generic compliments were nice, but easily dismissed. Specific observations about what he appreciated about Patricia on that particular day felt more genuine and had more impact. They also talked about the importance of accountability. They had asked their children and close friends to check in on them regularly, to ask how their marriage was doing, and to call them out if they saw old patterns returning. That external accountability had been valuable in the early months when it would have been easy to slip back into familiar but unhealthy patterns. Knowing that people they respected were watching and supporting their progress had motivated them to stay committed to the work even when it was difficult. The anniversary episode included testimonials from people whose lives had been changed by watching the Hendersons' story. There was the couple who had been on the brink of divorce, but had decided to try counseling instead after seeing Patricia and Michael's example. They reported that their marriage was now the strongest it had ever been. There was the woman who had been carrying the weight of her own secret wound for 15 years, who had finally spoken her truth to her husband, and they were now in the process of healing together. There was the man who had started the practice of daily affirmations with his wife, and had seen their relationship transform as a result. Each of these testimonials reinforced the impact that one couple's willingness to be vulnerable on national television had created. The Hendersons had given people permission to address their own relationship wounds, and had provided a roadmap for how to do it with honesty, accountability, and hope. Their story had become a cultural touchstone for conversations about marriage, communication, and the long-term consequences of words spoken in anger. As the anniversary episode drew to a close, Steve Harvey reflected on why the Henderson story had resonated so deeply with so many people. He said it was because the story was ultimately about hope. Yes, it involved pain and regret and years of suffering, but it also demonstrated that it was never too late to address old wounds, never too late to commit to real change, and never too late to choose healing over continued suffering. In a world that often seemed cynical about marriage and relationships, the Hendersons had shown that love and commitment, when combined with honesty and genuine effort, could overcome even decades of pain. Patricia and Michael Henderson continue to this day to work on their marriage. They report that it is not always easy, that old patterns sometimes try to reassert themselves, and that healing from 27 years of distance takes time and ongoing effort. But they also report that their marriage now is deeper, more authentic, and more fulfilling than it ever was during those first 8 years before Michael's hurtful words created the rift. They have learned that a relationship built on daily honesty and affirmation is stronger than one built on pretending everything is fine. Their story serves as a powerful reminder about several important truths. Words have tremendous power to harm or to heal, and we must take responsibility for the words we speak. Pain that is hidden does not heal, but instead festers and grows. Marriage requires ongoing effort and attention, not just a good start. Forgiveness is possible even for deep wounds, but it requires genuine remorse and consistent action to rebuild trust. And perhaps most importantly, it is never too late to choose a better path forward, to speak the truth that needs to be spoken, and to commit to genuine healing rather than just surface-level peace. The Henderson family story also highlights the unexpected power of vulnerability. Patricia's decision to speak her truth on national television was terrifying, but it led to healing not just for her marriage, but for countless others who were inspired by her example. Michael's willingness to accept full responsibility for his words and their impact, without defensiveness or excuses, modeled a kind of accountability that many people had never witnessed. Together, they showed that the path to healing runs directly through vulnerability and truth-telling, uncomfortable as that journey might be. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. And if you are carrying your own hidden wound in a relationship, consider whether it might be time to speak your truth. You deserve to be seen, heard, and valued. Your pain matters, and healing is possible. Steve Harvey often reflects on the day Patricia Henderson stood at his Fast Money podium and changed everything. He says that in a career filled with memorable moments and meaningful encounters, that afternoon in September 2024 stands out as one of the most powerful. He had watched a woman find the courage to speak a truth she had been hiding for 27 years. He had witnessed a man genuinely hear and accept responsibility for the deep pain he had caused. And he had seen a family begin a process of real healing that would impact not just them, but thousands of others. The episode remains one of the most watched and most shared in Family Feud history, but more importantly, it remains one of the most impactful. It sparked conversations in living rooms and therapist offices and church halls about what healthy relationships look like, about the importance of addressing wounds rather than hiding them, and about the possibility of redemption and renewal even after decades of distance and pain. The Hendersons gave people hope that their own struggling relationships could be healed if they were willing to do the uncomfortable work of honesty and accountability. Patricia Henderson is no longer the quiet, diminished woman who stood on that stage carrying a secret wound. She is a confident woman pursuing her education, leading a support group for other women, and modeling what healthy self-worth looks like. Michael Henderson is no longer the distant, oblivious husband taking his wife for granted. He is a man committed to daily acts of affirmation and presence in his marriage. Together, they are building something authentic and strong on the foundation of hard-won honesty. Their story reminds us all that the words we speak matter, that the wounds we carry deserve attention and care, and that it is never too late to choose healing over suffering. Marriage is not about perfection. It is about two imperfect people choosing each day to show up honestly, to speak truthfully, to listen deeply, and to work towards something better than what they had yesterday. The Hendersons are living proof that this kind of marriage is possible, even after 27 years of distance and pain. And that is a message of hope that the world desperately needs.